During Easter brunch, my cousin asked how much I got from Grandpa's will. I said, "What will?" The whole table went silent, forks midair, eyes wide. That was the moment I realized something was horribly wrong. Stay with me while I share what really happened. If my story hits your heart, don't forget to show some love and share it with someone who believes family should never betray you. It had been 6 months since Grandpa Walter passed away. Easter was his favorite holiday. He loved the pastel eggs, the laughter, the smell of ham baking in the oven. I told myself this year would be different without him, but I wanted to keep the tradition alive. So when Aunt Claudia invited everyone over for brunch, I said yes. The house smelled like cinnamon and coffee when I arrived. My cousin Brittany was already there, dressed like she'd stepped out of a magazine, laughing too loudly, flashing that smile that never reached her eyes. Mom sat quietly at the corner of the table, avoiding my gaze. I thought she was just emotional about Grandpa. Everything felt almost normal until Brittany leaned forward with her usual fake sweetness and asked, "So, Harper, how much did you end up getting from Grandpa's will?" I blinked. "What will?" That was when the air froze. My aunt's hand tightened around her glass. Brittany's smirk faded. Even my mom looked pale. Nobody said a word for what felt like forever. Finally, Aunt Claudia forced a laugh. "Oh, I must have been mistaken. Forget it, dear." But I couldn't forget it. My stomach twisted. I tried to laugh it off, but the silence that followed was heavy, like everyone knew something I didn't. The rest of the meal passed in awkward small talk. Brittany bragged about her new car. Claudia talked about renovating her house, Grandpa's house. I noticed how she said it so naturally, as if it had always been hers. After brunch, I helped clear the dishes, hoping to talk to Mom alone. But every time I caught her eye, she looked away. Something in me started to ache. Grandpa and I had been close. He taught me how to drive, how to plant tomatoes, how to stand up for myself. Before he passed, he told me, "I've made sure you'll be okay." Those words used to comfort me. Now they just confused me. Driving home that afternoon, I couldn't stop replaying the brunch in my head. The way Brittany had looked at me, the nervous glances, Claudia's quick subject change. I felt like an outsider in my own family. I parked in front of my apartment, staring out the window at the rain starting to fall. Grandpa had always been so careful with his things, his house, his savings. There had to be a will. But if there was, why didn't I know about it? That question wouldn't leave me. And deep down, I already feared the answer. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of the rain tapping against my window felt like a heartbeat reminding me something wasn't right. I kept seeing their faces at brunch, the way Aunt Claudia froze, the way Mom's eyes darted away when I said, "What will?" I told myself I was overthinking, but deep down I knew I wasn't. Grandpa wasn't the kind of man to leave things messy. He was organized, thoughtful, and always fair. The next day, I drove to his old house. It still smelled like him, pipe tobacco and cedarwood. Aunt Claudia had already started changing things, but Grandpa's study was untouched. It used to be his favorite room. The shelves were lined with history books and old photos, his medals from the army neatly framed on the wall. I ran my fingers along his desk, remembering how he used to sit there writing letters to old friends. I opened the top drawer. Receipts, a few envelopes, a photo of me when I was 8 holding a fishing rod. The next drawer had his checkbook, some insurance papers, and a faded envelope labeled private. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a stack of papers, legal-looking but not signed. At the top it read, "Last Will and Testament of Walter Lane." My breath caught. The words blurred as I read them. He'd listed everything. The house, his savings, his car, and my name was written beside each. To my granddaughter, Harper Lane, for her loyalty, compassion, and care. I felt tears sting my eyes. It was dated just 2 months before his death. But there was no signature. It was just a draft. Still, it meant he'd planned for me to have everything. So what happened? I sat there for a long time, the paper trembling in my hands. Finally, I grabbed my phone and called Mom. "Can you come over? I found something." She arrived 20 minutes later, her coat still damp from the rain. When she saw the paper on the desk, her face went pale. "Mom," I said quietly, "why didn't anyone tell me there was a will?" She hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the window. "Honey, I didn't want to get involved in all that. It's complicated." "Complicated how?" I pressed. She sighed and sat down, her voice low. "A few days before your grandfather passed, I overheard your aunt talking to Mr. Heller, his lawyer. They were arguing. She said something about fixing the paperwork before it's too late. I thought she meant updating medical documents or something. I didn't want to believe. She trailed off, tears forming. The room felt colder suddenly. You think Aunt Claudia changed it? I don't know, Mom whispered. But whatever happened, it wasn't right. I looked back at the draft. My chest tightened with anger and disbelief. Grandpa trusted her. He trusted them all. And somehow they'd twisted everything. I folded the papers carefully, my mind already racing. If they'd buried the truth once, I'd dig until I found it. The next morning, I drove straight to the office of Raymond Heller, my grandfather's lawyer. His name was neatly printed on a shiny brass plaque beside the door. I remembered Grandpa mentioning him once or twice. He'd trusted the man completely. My hands were sweaty as I walked inside, the smell of old paper and coffee filling the air. A young receptionist greeted me politely and told me to wait. When Mr. Heller finally came out, he looked older than I remembered from Grandpa's funeral. Gray hair, tired eyes behind square glasses. He forced a smile when he saw me. Harper, it's been a while. I was so sorry about Walter's passing. I returned a small nod. Thank you. I actually needed to talk to you about his will. At that, his smile faltered. He motioned for me to follow him into his office. The blinds were half closed, and the desk was cluttered with files. He sat behind it, folding his hands carefully. What exactly do you want to know? I found an unsigned draft in his study, I said, keeping my tone calm. It named me as the heir to the house and his savings. But no one ever mentioned a final version. So I just want to understand what happened. He cleared his throat. I'm afraid I can't discuss the details of your grandfather's estate, Harper. Attorney-client privilege. I leaned forward slightly. Mr. Heller, my grandfather loved me. He told me himself he'd made sure I'd be okay. But somehow, Aunt Claudia and Brittany now own everything he worked for. Doesn't that seem odd to you? His eyes flickered away, focusing on a stack of folders. Walter did change his will shortly before he passed, he said slowly. He insisted on it. He claimed he wanted to simplify matters and leave everything to Claudia and her daughter. Property, accounts, vehicles, everything. The words hit me like ice. He changed it. When? Just 3 days before his death. My stomach turned. Was he even well enough to make that kind of decision? Mr. Heller sighed. He had some episodes of confusion toward the end. Memory lapses, forgetfulness. I advised caution, but he was insistent. There it was, the excuse. Mental clarity issues. The perfect reason to justify anything. Can I see the final document? I asked. I'm sorry, he said, shaking his head. Only the listed beneficiaries are entitled to access the full file. I noticed his hands tremble slightly as he picked up a pen. His gaze never quite met mine. There was something in his tone, guilt, hesitation, maybe fear. I could feel it. I stood up, forcing a polite smile. Thank you for your time, Mr. Heller. I appreciate your honesty. He nodded quickly, almost relieved that I was leaving. But as I stepped outside, the cold wind hit my face, and everything inside me hardened. Grandpa hadn't changed that will. Not willingly. Someone had manipulated him, or worse. If they thought I'd walk away quietly, they didn't know me at all. Finding Angela Rivera wasn't easy. Grandpa's nurse had left town shortly after his death, and Aunt Claudia claimed she didn't have her number anymore. But I wasn't giving up. After a few calls to the local care agency, I finally got a lead, a small address outside Dayton. I drove there on a gray afternoon, my heart pounding the entire way. Angela lived in a modest brick house with a small garden in front. When she opened the door, I could tell she recognized me right away. Her expression softened. Harper Lane, she said quietly. You look just like your grandfather. That made my throat tighten. Thank you, Ms. Rivera. I just need to ask you a few questions about him, if that's okay. She hesitated, then stepped aside to let me in. The house smelled like lavender and fresh coffee. We sat at her kitchen table, sunlight spilling across the worn wood. For a while, she said nothing. I could see the conflict in her eyes. Finally, I broke the silence. You were with my grandfather almost every day before he passed, right? Yes, she said softly. He was still strong, you know. He had his moments of pain, but his mind was sharp. He talked a lot about you. That caught me off guard. About me? Angela smiled faintly. He said you reminded him of your grandmother. Kind. Hardworking. He wanted you to have his house when he was gone. He made me promise to make sure you were okay. A lump formed in my throat. Then what happened? Angela's smile faded. She looked down at her hands. I shouldn't say this, but you deserve to know. The night before he died, your aunt came over. It was late. They argued loudly. I could hear them from the kitchen. My chest tightened. Argued about what? She wanted him to sign some papers, Angela whispered. He refused. He said something like, "You're not taking what's meant for Harper." I didn't hear all of it, but it didn't sound good. The room went quiet. I barely breathed. Angela's voice dropped lower. Afterward, she made him tea. She told me to go rest, that she'd handle his bedtime routine. But when I passed by the doorway, I saw her pour something from a small bottle into his cup. I froze. I didn't know what it was. I wanted to say something, but I was afraid. Your aunt has power. Connections. My pulse pounded in my ears. You think she poisoned him? Tears welled in her eyes. I don't know for sure. But the next morning, he was gone. He looked peaceful, but I'll never forget the guilt I felt for not speaking up. I sat there in silence, trying to steady my breathing. My hands were trembling. The story sounded insane, unbelievable even, but something deep inside me believed every word. If Angela was right, Grandpa didn't die from a heart attack. He was silenced. And now I knew exactly who had done it. A few weeks after visiting Angela, I started seeing photos pop up in the family group chat. Claudia and Brittany smiling in front of Grandpa's house. The walls were repainted, the porch redone, and the garden where he used to plant tomatoes was replaced with a stone fountain. My stomach turned every time I looked at those pictures. It wasn't just a house to me. It was where Grandpa taught me everything good I knew about family. Now it looked like something from a real estate ad, cold and fake. Then came the invitation. "We're having a small gathering to celebrate the renovations," Claudia texted, followed by a string of champagne emojis. I stared at it for a long time. My first instinct was to ignore it. But then I thought of Angela's trembling hands, her story, and Grandpa's unsigned will. Maybe pretending to play along would give me answers. So I replied, "I'll be there." When I arrived that evening, the house barely felt familiar. Brittany opened the door, her perfume filling the air. "Harper," she said with forced excitement. "You look amazing. Come in." I smiled politely, even though every word tasted bitter. Inside, the rooms were bright and loud. Music playing, laughter echoing, people sipping wine as if this house hadn't once belonged to a man who'd built it with his bare hands. I walked through each room slowly, noticing details no one else cared about. The safe Grandpa kept in his study was gone. His medals gone. Even the photo of him and Grandma that used to sit by the window was missing. Claudia floated from guest to guest, showing off like a queen at her coronation. "It was time to modernize," she said, her voice dripping with pride. The old place needed some class. I clenched my jaw but smiled anyway. "It looks different," I said, pretending to admire it. Later in the evening, I slipped away from the crowd and wandered into the office. There was a new desk, sleek and expensive. Papers were stacked neatly on top. I glanced through them, receipts, bank statements, renovation invoices. My eyes caught one detail. A wire transfer from Grandpa's savings account made 2 days after his death. My heart skipped. That account was supposed to be frozen. I quietly snapped a photo with my phone. When I returned to the living room, Brittany was on her second glass of wine, laughing too loudly. "You know," she slurred a little, "it wasn't supposed to go this far." I froze. "What do you mean?" I asked, pretending to sound casual. Her eyes widened, realizing she'd said too much. "Nothing, just, Mom didn't want it to get messy. But Grandpa was so stubborn." She laughed awkwardly, taking another sip. I smiled and nodded, pretending not to notice how Claudia shot her a warning glare from across the room. My phone was already recording in my pocket, catching every word. That night, as I drove home with the sound of their laughter fading in my ears, I finally stopped feeling powerless. They thought I was just the quiet one, but I was done staying quiet. The next morning, I spread everything across my kitchen table: photos, receipts, the unsigned will, and my phone with Brittany's recorded words. It looked like a puzzle made of betrayal. I knew I couldn't do this alone anymore. Grandpa had a friend named Eli Warren, a retired detective. He'd shown up at the funeral, quiet and respectful, and told me, "Your granddad was one of the good ones. If you ever need anything, you call me." I'd never thought I would take him up on it. Until now. When I called, Eli remembered me right away. "Harper Lane, right? Walter's granddaughter. What's going on?" His voice was low and steady, the kind that made you feel safe. "I think something's wrong with the way my grandfather's estate was handled," I said carefully. "And maybe with how he died." There was a short pause. "Come by this afternoon," he said. "Bring everything." Eli lived in a small house near the edge of town. His living room looked like an evidence board waiting to happen. Papers stacked neatly, maps pinned on corkboards, a magnifying glass sitting by the window. When I laid everything out for him, he listened without interrupting. He studied each photo, each note, each document, his brow furrowing deeper by the minute. When I showed him the copy of Grandpa's final will, the one leaving everything to Claudia and Brittany, he compared it to the draft I'd found. "You see this?" he said, pointing to the signature. "The pressure pattern's wrong. Look here, the W in Walter. It's smoother, like someone traced it instead of writing it naturally. I've seen this before. I'd bet my badge this was copied from an older document." My stomach tightened. "You think it's forged?" "I think someone wanted it to look real enough that nobody would question it," Eli said. "But it's sloppy. The notary stamp doesn't line up, and this witness signature, Raymond Heller. That's your lawyer, right? He'd know how to make this stick legally." I nodded slowly, remembering the way Heller avoided my eyes. Eli leaned back in his chair. "Now, the death certificate. You said he died of a heart attack." "Yeah, that's what they told us." He examined it for a long moment, tracing the printed lines with his finger. "See this? Cause of death signed off by a physician who wasn't his regular doctor. That's already strange. And the date on the form, it's time-stamped at 2:47 a.m. But your nurse said she found him at 6 in the morning. That's a 3-hour gap." The room felt smaller suddenly. "So it could have been covered up?" "Looks like it," he said quietly. "If your aunt and the lawyer were working together, they could have manipulated both the will and the death records. It's not just fraud, it's possible homicide." The words hung heavy in the air. I looked at the papers again, my pulse steady, my hands no longer shaking. The grief that used to drown me was gone. In its place was something sharper. I wasn't just hurt anymore, I was ready. They wanted this buried. But I was going to dig until every lie was uncovered. I decided the only way to bring them down was to make them believe I'd given up. Eli agreed. It was time to set a trap. So I sent out the invitations, simple and polite. "Dinner at my place this Friday. I'd love to put everything behind us and move forward as a family." I even added a smiley face, just to make it believable. Within an hour, both Claudia and Brittany replied. Mr. Heller confirmed later that evening. They probably thought I was finally accepting my place, the outsider left with nothing. I spent the next few days preparing, not just the food but the stage. Eli helped me install a small recorder in the living room, another near the dining table. I wasn't sure what would happen, but I was ready. Friday came faster than I expected. I wore a soft blue dress Grandpa had once said brought out my eyes. When the doorbell rang, I took a breath and smiled like I had nothing on my mind but forgiveness. Claudia arrived first, carrying a bottle of expensive wine. "I'm glad you called, Harper," she said, her voice sweet but hollow. "It's time we let the past rest." Brittany followed, hugging me awkwardly, then brushing past to admire the decor. "Cute place," she said, already glancing around for something to judge. Mr. Heller came last. He looked nervous, adjusting his tie as he stepped inside. "Good evening," he said stiffly. "It's nice to see you all together again." We sat around the table, the candles flickering between us. I poured wine and forced small talk, about work, about the weather, about anything except what we were all really thinking. The tension sat between us like smoke. Halfway through dinner, I started weaving in small memories about Grandpa. "Do you remember how he used to hide chocolate eggs around the yard every Easter?" I asked, smiling faintly. "He'd always put one behind that big lilac bush. Said it was our secret spot." Brittany froze mid-bite. "Oh yeah, I think I remember that." But she didn't. That spot had been mine and Grandpa's, just ours. I watched her shift in her chair, her fingers tightening around her glass. Then I mentioned how Grandpa used to hum old war songs while reading the newspaper, something only I and the nurse would know. Mr. Heller's fork clinked softly against his plate. Finally, I leaned back and said casually, "You know, I've been talking to Grandpa's nurse lately. Angela. She remembers a lot from those last few days." The reaction was instant. Claudia's hand froze in midair, her smile vanishing. Brittany's eyes darted to her mother. Mr. Heller's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. I let the silence linger, pretending to sip my wine. Inside, my heart was pounding, but my face stayed calm. Claudia forced a shaky laugh. "Oh, I didn't know you were still in touch with her." I smiled sweetly. "Oh yes, she remembers everything." For the first time, I saw fear flicker across Claudia's face, and I knew my trap had just started to close. The air snapped like a live wire the moment Claudia's voice rose above the hum of the dining room heater. "You think you're clever, don't you?" she hissed, shoving her chair back so hard it scraped the floor. "You've always been jealous, Harper. Always the martyr, acting like you were Grandpa's little saint while the rest of us were just vultures." I didn't flinch. I'd expected this explosion. It was the reason I'd invited them. "Jealous?" I said softly, folding my napkin. "Of what exactly?" "The house that was promised to me. The one you forged a will for." Claudia's face went pale, then flushed red. "How dare you?" Before she could finish, Brittany burst out, her voice trembling. "Mom, stop. She already knows." Then, realizing what she'd just said, she covered her mouth. Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. I leaned forward, calm, deliberate. "Knows what, Brittany?" "That it was supposed to just be the house." The room went dead silent. Mr. Heller stared at his plate. Claudia's jaw tightened. Brittany's chest heaved as she whispered, "It wasn't supposed to go this far." I reached into my pocket and set my phone on the table. "You mean like this far?" I tapped the screen, and the room filled with Brittany's own voice, recorded days earlier at Claudia's little wine party. "It wasn't supposed to go this far." Claudia's eyes widened in horror. You recorded her?" "Yes," I said. "And before you start denying anything else, Angela Rivera gave me a sworn statement. She remembers you arguing with Grandpa the night before his heart attack. She saw you pour something into his tea." Claudia's breath hitched. "That woman's lying." "Maybe," I said, standing slowly. "But the district attorney will get to decide that, won't they?" She slammed her palms on the table. "You ungrateful snake," she shouted. "After everything I've done for this family." "You mean after everything you've taken?" Claudia's face contorted, rage overtaking fear. She grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door, muttering curses under her breath. The front door slammed, leaving an echo that seemed to rattle through the whole house. I exhaled, shaking slightly. Brittany was crying now, whispering, "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I swear, Harper, I didn't know." But I wasn't listening. My mind was already racing. Something told me Claudia wouldn't have walked out without calling someone. Then I saw it, her phone, sitting on the table beside her half-finished glass of wine. Eli and I exchanged a look. "Don't touch it yet," he said when I called him moments later. "Bring it to me. We'll clone it first." When we scrolled through the messages, the truth finally snapped into place. Text threads between Claudia and Mr. Heller. Mentions of draft versions, deleting the old file, and making sure the ink looks aged. I looked at Eli. He nodded grimly. "This isn't just fraud, Harper." And for the first time, I said it out loud. "It's murder." The morning the detectives came for Claudia, the sky was gray and heavy, as if the world itself knew what was coming. I watched from across the street, my coat pulled tight around me, as two unmarked cars rolled up to her driveway. For once, her perfectly trimmed hedges and spotless porch didn't look like a symbol of pride. They looked like a stage for her downfall. Claudia stepped outside, still in her silk robe, confusion twisting into fury when she saw the officers. "This is a mistake," she snapped, trying to sound in control. But when they mentioned the charges, fraud, forgery, conspiracy, her face went slack. She glanced around, maybe expecting someone to defend her. No one did. Not even Brittany, who stood frozen on the porch steps, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Later, I sat in the detective's office as they explained how it had all unfolded. Eli had turned in the cloned phone data, the altered will drafts, and the nurse's sworn testimony. It was airtight. The ink on the fake will was dated weeks after Grandpa's supposed signing. And the biggest blow? Brittany's confession. Terrified of prison, she'd broken within hours. She told investigators everything. How her mother had convinced Mr. Heller to adjust the will, how Claudia had whispered that Grandpa was losing clarity, and how she'd tampered with his medication to help nature take its course. Her voice shook as she admitted it. She said it was supposed to just make him sleep through the night, not end things. Hearing that made my stomach twist. I should have felt triumph, but all I felt was cold. Grandpa hadn't just been betrayed. He'd been stolen from, his time, his dignity, his trust. Weeks passed before the trial began. Mr. Heller looked smaller in court, pale and sweating under the fluorescent lights. His reputation as a pillar of integrity was shredded within days. Claudia, on the other hand, refused to look at me. When the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, she finally did. Her stare wasn't one of remorse. It was hatred. As they led her away in handcuffs, I thought I'd feel free. But the relief that came was quiet, muted, like a whisper in a church after everyone's gone home. When it was all over, I visited Grandpa's grave. The air smelled like rain and lilacs, just like the day of his funeral. I placed a small wooden box beside his headstone. Inside were copies of the photos, letters, and the original draft of his will that had named me heir. "I kept my promise," I whispered. "They can't hurt you anymore." For a long time, I just sat there, the wind rustling the grass, the world moving on around me. Justice had been served, but there was no victory dance, no applause. Just the truth, ugly, painful, and real. As I walked away, I realized revenge wasn't about winning. It was about restoring peace to someone who couldn't fight for themselves. And in that moment, I finally felt Grandpa's presence again, steady, proud, and free. The house on Willow Creek looked almost the same as it did when I was little. White paint, green shutters, and the old porch swing creaking softly in the wind. But something about it felt different now. Maybe it was because, for the first time, it truly belonged to me. Not by inheritance or luck, but by truth finally brought to light. The air carried the faint scent of lilacs, the same flowers Grandpa planted decades ago. They lined the walkway in full bloom, stubbornly beautiful even after years of neglect. I knelt down to touch one, the petals cool and soft against my fingers. Grandpa used to say lilacs were a promise, that even after the harshest winters, something gentle would still return. I finally understood what he meant. I stepped inside and let the door close behind me. The floorboards creaked in familiar places, just like they used to when I'd sneak into the kitchen for cookies as a kid. I could almost hear his laugh echoing through the hall, deep and warm, the kind of sound that made everything feel safe. The house had been fully restored, new paint, polished floors, the broken banister replaced, but I'd made sure one thing stayed untouched: Grandpa's old study. The room where I'd found the unsigned draft of his will months ago. I pushed the door open and breathed in the faint smell of cedar and old books. His desk stood by the window, sunlight pooling across it. From my bag, I pulled out a framed photo of him, the one taken on his last birthday, wearing that worn-out navy cap he never let go of. I placed it on the desk, right where he used to keep his cup of tea, and whispered, "It's over, Grandpa. I made it right." For a long moment, I just stood there, letting the stillness settle around me. It wasn't joy that I felt. It was peace, quiet, fragile peace that I'd fought tooth and nail for. The kind that doesn't come from winning, but from finally laying something painful to rest. Outside, the wind picked up, making the lilacs sway against the window. The sunlight caught the edges of the picture frame, and for a second, it looked like the room was glowing. Maybe it was just my imagination, but it felt like Grandpa was there, watching, proud, free. I walked out to the porch, letting the screen door shut softly behind me. The neighborhood was calm, children's laughter echoing faintly from down the street. I sat on the porch swing and watched the petals fall from the lilac bushes, drifting lazily onto the steps. There was no celebration, no grand ending, just the sound of the wind, the flowers, and my own quiet heartbeat. I didn't forgive my family, and maybe I never would. But I had something better now: the truth, the house, and the strength to move forward. And in that silence, I finally felt at home again. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who believes in justice and family. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more real stories that remind us truth always finds its way home.